Have you ever wondered why the 20th century corporation model is a hierarchy? Before we look at different models, it's important to understand the source of what's the predominant way of companies organizing. So let's take a trip down to the beginning of the century. In the mid-1920s, a gentleman by the name of Alfred P. Sloan figured out how to organize a large number of people to accomplish a single goal. What he did is he broke down the company into functional groups separately: marketing, customer service, manufacturing, etc. And then within each of these groups, he broke down the work further and further into small tasks until he got to a point where he had small tasks that could be done by people of like skill repetitively. And each of these groups became a department, and that was then rolled up and integrated into a hierarchy. This is how the modern corporation was born. The hierarchy of the 20th century corporation, however, is somewhat inhumane. We have two classes of citizens, the bosses and the employees, the latter having to do whatever the former tells them to do. We have bureaucracy, which is exhausting, and lots of meetings. And we have a situation where work life and personal life have to be kept separate. Now imagine an environment where what you have are empowered teams with multiple skills that are self-managed to achieve a particular goal. You have no bosses and no bureaucracy. And just as importantly, family life and work life are one life. That is the culture of Teal. Now, you must be asking, how does it work? If there is no hierarchy, no bosses, no procedures, no bureaucracy, then how does it work? How do we put together human talent and drive it to the desired result without the model of the 20th century? So let's take a look at how at Múcua we address the challenge of Teal. At the heart of the Múcua model is the realization that a work environment is really a network of people who are communicating with each other. And what we have to do is structure things so that the ability to communicate and network in order to get things done is not encumbered by the organizational model, bureaucracy, intervention of leaders, and so on. The Múcua model then is a very simple model of a network of people communicating amongst themselves while they do work, where we are going to focus parts of the network so that it achieves the corporate goal. This diagram, which is drawn by software, represents one such network of people in the workplace. The nodes represent employees and the lines represent conversations that go amongst those employees. You will notice that usually around one employee, sometimes more than one employee, there are clusters of activity and communication amongst them. But if you zoom out a little bit, you're going to see larger clusters of groups of small clusters without a lot of activity crossing those larger clusters. If we look inside one of the smaller clusters, what we find is a number of individuals of different skills working together to perform a task or to achieve a goal. And this small group is what we call a pod. Of course, there can be many pods. Each one of the red circles is a pod. And when all the pods come together to perform a bigger task or achieve a common goal, we call this a hut. And there can be several huts involved in achieving a corporate mission. So all the huts together that achieve a corporate mission, we call this a village. Thus, in the Múcua model, we have pods, huts, and villages. What we must never forget, though, is when we are outlining these different structures, we're not raising walls. The network of communication that exists between all the individuals of an entire village never gets broken. People can communicate within a pod, within a hut, from hut to hut. That is the richness and the power of human networks achieving the promise of a corporation to the market. In the Múcua model, an organization is made up of self-sufficient pods. But pods don't result from a functional decomposition. So how then do we put them together? How do we know which pods we should have in our operation? Let's take as an example the process manufacturing industry. Most organizations will have 4 basic promises to the market, as it were. New products, good relationships, good service, and of course, finished goods. Within each of these streams, there's work going on. So let's take a look at one of them, the finished goods stream. Here we will find several streams of activities. One stream will deal with the purchase of raw materials, with their analysis and release for manufacturing. Another stream of work will actually manufacture the finished goods. And then a third stream of work will do the analytical work to make sure that the product is in conditions to be consumed by the end customer. Now, here's the really important point. All these activities are important and interesting. However, not all of them deliver something that is considered of value by that end customer. So, for instance, if you just buy raw materials and they are not released for manufacturing, that doesn't really have any value. Finished goods that have not been analyzed and approved for consumption, they're not of much value either. So there are specific points where we deliver something that a customer would recognize as being of value. And in this case, we find 2 of those points. When raw materials are in inventory and available for manufacturing, and the point where the finished goods are available for consumption by end customers. Now, if we take the activities that lead to one of those points of value, say for instance the manufacturing and releasing of finished goods, we now find the scope of a pod. And that pod will have a number of individuals with all the skills necessary to execute all those activities, such as warehouse operator, manufacturing operator, industrial engineer, chemist, and so on. The same thing can be done with the top tier of this layer of work, where we will find a pod. That pod will have all the skills necessary to execute the activities of purchasing, analyzing, and releasing raw materials. If we bring the other pod back in, we can see that now with 2 pods we have everything we need to execute the entire chain of activities of the finished goods stream. And in order to ensure that there is a tight coherence between these 2 pods, we identify a hut that entails both of them. Now, notice 2 very important things in this structure. One, the decomposition of pods is not functional. Second, the same skills can appear in more than one pod. The Múcua model is made of pods of individuals who self-manage to get the work done. Question though is, what about leadership? In Múcua, what we recognize is that, like in any work environment, when people are working on daily tasks, they don't see the tree from the forest. In a fairly large network of individuals, there's a need for somebody to be looking over the big picture, and these we call eagles. The role of eagles is to work together to maintain the cohesion of the huts and how combined they achieve the corporate goal. But they work together, and thus they constitute a pod that we call eagle pod. So each hut has an eagle, and all the eagles together work in an eagle pod. It's worth emphasizing again that eagles are not traditional leaders. They are not distant from the troops, and they don't work separate from each other. Instead, eagles work within the pods, they mingle with the pods, they listen to their conversations, and when they come together as a team in a pod to discuss what they have seen and any issues for the village, their communications are public. This being cyberspace, the discussions that occur between eagles are seen by everybody, and everybody participates in those conversations. So discussions about direction, shape of pods and huts, and the overall mission of the village are not private to those eagles. They are of interest to, and they are shared by everybody in the network. The leadership provided by eagles is immersive. It's not detached, and it's participative. It's not hierarchical. Now let's look at a bit of a different perspective. Should the pods of a certain type be unique? So only one customer service pod, for instance, or should there be many of the same type but with different focuses? This is what we call instances. Let's look again at a pharmaceutical manufacturer. They develop small molecule products, and so they have a hut for that. But they also develop biologics, so they will have another similar hut for that. And they will have another hut that focuses on launching products in 3 different markets. They have 2 manufacturing plants, so that they will have one for small molecule, one for biologics, one hut for each. And finally, they have the hut for supply and service, which will have multiple pods depending on the nature of what we're supplying. Each hut then will have an eagle, and we can now appreciate the value of having an eagle pod where the movements that occur in the business in various areas are discussed together, and the village is kept intact in its mission. This is the Múcua model, a very simple model made of pods of individuals of multiple skills driving to very specific results that are meaningful to customers, grouped in huts to achieve great cohesion in the promises to the market, and arranged in a multiplicity of huts, the whole overseen by a group of eagles that work in their own pod and collaborate directly with the people in the individual pods in order to achieve great success in the mission of the village and the enterprise.